Hello, welcome to a bonus episode of the Book Binge where it's just going to be a real short video. I want to give a shout out to a story that I think is very worth reading, not something that I'm going to cover on a normal traditional episode of the Book Binge, and that is The Barrow King by Christopher Ruocchio, a story that I'm not going to say very much about because I think that you guys should be able to experience for yourself completely, assuming there's anybody watching this video who hasn't already read the story. The story is very, very good. One of my favorite things that Christopher has written or worked on, period, in any capacity. Probably top 3 favorite things he's written. Just straight up, that's how much I enjoyed the story. It's how much I enjoyed being able to experience it when he sent it to me for the first time a few months back. I was like, this is absolutely incredible. Now, a little bit of the story behind it without getting into suggesting what the story's about, because I don't want to get into that at all in this video. The Barrow King is one of the secret projects that Christopher has been working on over the past several months. He's referred to these things. And, well, it's a short story. And originally, when he sent it to me, we were thinking, okay, well, maybe this will come out sometime in May, first half of 2024, and we'll see kind of what happens there. I'm like, okay, I won't talk about it. He asked me sincerely, please do not mention this at all until, I announce it or it gets released or something. I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. So basically, that's why back in around like March or April or something like that, I forget exactly when. In fact, it might have even been a little bit earlier than that. I don't fully remember, but that's why in a couple of my reading updates on the channel, I would say I read a short secret project by Christopher Ruocchio. The Barrow King was the first one of those secret projects that I mentioned I was reading earlier this year, and when I mentioned that it was one of the most fun things I've ever read from Christopher in the Murdered Son review relatively recently on the channel, when I talked about that, and then of course the story that's linked with that in the Andoritis special edition upcoming hopefully late this year, The Prince of Man, that short story. I said this is probably the second most fun thing I've ever read from Christopher, because the first most fun thing is something that I actually can't talk about yet. That first most fun thing is The Barrow King, and I'm just going to go in and actually read what he specifically wrote to introduce the story in the various different places he announced it. To quote Christopher, "Hey everyone, I've alluded to several secret projects being in the works over the last few months. This is one of the smallest. Or is it? Galaxy magazine is back after a long hiatus. It was one of the old pulps, and my friend Jean-Paul Garnier ended up on the editorial team. My apologies if I personally mispronounced that name. Anyway, long story short, I have a story in the return issue, and said issue is 100% free. You can read the new story right here at galaxysf.com. So that is where you can go. You can get a free PDF version of the upcoming magazine, and The Barrow King is in that. It is in that collection. It is in that magazine there. So definitely go check that out if you haven't read it. I'm not going to say anything about the content other than that it is really good if you're into some interesting world building ideas and you're into a really, really interesting and engaging protagonist. Those are really the only 2 things that you really need to commit to with this story. It's only about 6,300 words, if I remember correctly. Let me go ahead and pull up the document that he sent of it. Not on screen, but I'm going to pull it up myself to double check the word count on it. Yeah, it's right about 6,200 words or so. So give or take around that range. It's not very long. That's a pretty, as far as Christopher's chapter lengths go, that's like maybe twice the average chapter length for some of the earlier books, and probably a little bit more comparable to average chapter lengths in a couple of the later books, depending on how you see things. It's not very long at all. It's pretty easy, short commitment. I highly recommend it. As I said before, it's probably one of my favorite things. In fact, it is one of my favorite things Christopher has ever worked on. That said, if you have not read anything in the Sun Eater universe, you can read The Barrow King. There are no reading requirements for any of Christopher's writings before going into this one. So if you haven't read any of Ruocchio, or if you're not necessarily a huge fan of the Sun Eater specifically, you can still read The Barrow King. It's a different type of setting. It's still kind of in that science fantasy sort of thing. depending on how deep you look into it, but it is very sword and sorcery inspired. Various people have described the world as feeling like Book of the New Sun meets Conan. So if you're into sword and sorcery, if you're into Conan, if you're into the short story type of protagonist type of thing like this, I definitely recommend the story. It is really great. And as I was saying, if you haven't read any Ruocchio, this is honestly a great place to start. It gives you a really good idea of how good his prose can be. And it also gives you a good idea of some of his, the way he's able to write character. And despite being in a story so short, the character in this story is one of my favorites. I'm really engaged by him. I really like it. The story itself is great, and even if you don't really like Sun Eater a whole lot, if you've tried Sun Eater and it wasn't necessarily your thing, I still think you should give this a shot, because it is good. And that's not to say necessarily what it is or what it isn't, but well, Christopher Ruocchio himself posted a video, which I'm going to link in the description of this one, that describes this as not a Sun Eater story, and that is basically all that you need going into it. So I heavily recommend The Barrow King by Christopher Ruocchio. If you haven't checked it out already, I greatly recommend that you do so, and I would really appreciate it if you do so, because like I think more people should experience this. It is great. I really appreciate Christopher for trusting me enough to send it to me and ask for opinions a few months back. It was an honor to be able to read it so early access, relatively speaking, but hey, we were expecting it at this point to not come out for a couple more months, so it is out at galaxysf.com. Sorry, let me pronounce that a little better. galaxysf.com. Of course, that is GALAXYSF.com. I'm not being paid to make this video, by the way. I'm just recommending it because I love this story so much. So that is the end of this video. Thank you for checking it out. If you did, I'll be back on Tuesday with a regular book binge episode, just as always. Thank you for watching. I'll be back in the next video.